people need to know that Juneteenth is not a black thing or a Texas thing. We all need to be about the business of freedom, because none of us are free till we're all free.
Welcome to the Living Undivided Juneteenth celebration. I'm Chuck Mingo, and I get to lead this incredible team of people who unite and ignite for racial justice. If you're not familiar with what we do, the core of what we do are 2 6-week transformative journeys, one called Living Undivided, one called Working Undivided, where people come together in a diverse group to have honest conversations about race with faith at the center. And from those conversations and experiences, people get ignited to pursue the work of justice. We don't want to just talk about justice. We want to, as it says in Micah 6:8, do justice. And we're here celebrating Juneteenth because it's also the birthday of our organization. And Juneteenth is everybody's holiday. It's a holiday rooted in the true essence of freedom. And we think there's also joy to be had in this work. Yes, it can be hard. Yes, the challenges are great, but there's joy to be had in this work. Joy that you're going to connect to through the stories of my friends. You're going to be meeting people that are on our staff team. You're going to be meeting our amazing alumni and other people, all who are pursuing the work of justice in unique ways. One of those stories is that of my friend Cameron Marshall. He's a filmmaker, and he's actually using that art medium to spark conversations about police and community relations, and he's doing it through the genre of comedy.
Hi, I'm Cam Marshall, and I'm a filmmaker. Yeah, I just finished writing, directing, producing my first feature film. It's called Freaky Profiling, and it's about a white police officer and a black activist get in a supernatural altercation and switch places. And so they have to work together to overcome their differences to switch back before it's too late. And it's really a story about empathy and how getting close to someone and learning what it's like to walk in someone else's shoes can really help you empathize with them. It's important. The story is important to me because, 2020, the height of, George Floyd and racial unrest in our country, I really felt like there are a lot of people screaming at each other, but there wasn't a lot of people listening to each other. And having gone through Undivided, I think that was a great model for me to see what it's like to share your experience with someone, not trying to attack them, but trying to help them understand where you come from. And so I really wanted to make a movie and a story that kind of challenged people to open their minds and their hearts to listening to someone before just judging and thinking they know how someone will respond. I think the biggest thing I learned through going through Undivided, myself being a black male and growing up with black parents, was I was kind of exhausted talking about race and just really kind of frustrated that some of my white brothers and sisters seemed to be just not able to have the conversation with me or just asking me a lot of questions, but I wasn't really listening to them. And as I started going through Undivided and hearing that, sometimes you just don't know what you don't know. And it's not that when someone asks you a question about race that they're, trying to start an argument. It's really like they're trying to learn and try to understand. And going through Undivided gave me more grace for my friends who are different than me and to help me be a safe place for them to kind of ask those questions. And so I took what I learned from that and tried to write a movie that I felt like didn't just preach at you, but kind of really gives you examples and situations for you to see how people interact with one another and let the audience decide of who do you feel like is in the right in this situation? How do you feel like you would have responded if you were this, character in this role and this was happening to you? I think the joy in the journey for me in making this movie is, making something that I can see people relate to. There's people on set when we be having different scenes and dialogue, and I can see their eyes light up of like, oh, wow, I never thought about it that way. Or I think just creating something where I hope that people can watch and just be a little bit more open, like their heart could be open a little bit more. And it's something that I hope as a filmmaker, I've done a job of just presenting something to someone to make them think a little bit differently.
I love that story. And now you're going to hear from someone who inspires me as he talks about what got him into the work of racial healing and justice.
I would say that God's been working on me around race since I was quite young, and it could go back to my dad coaching an interracial basketball team when I was very small in Anderson, Indiana. So I just thought these 8th grade basketball players were the Michael Jordans or the LeBron James or the Larry Birds of our little town. They were heroes. So getting to hang out with them, having positive first experiences across race, I think set a trajectory for me. A lot of my early reading was either mystery books like The Hardy Boys or The Three Investigators or Encyclopedia Brown, which I never got right, or it was sports biographies. And a lot of the ones I was drawn to were like Willie Mays or Hank Aaron or Jesse Owens or Jim Brown, and they all had these stories of discrimination. And frankly, my first introduction to segregation and Jim Crow was not learning it in school. I don't know how much we talked about it in my largely white elementary school, was reading about it in these youth-oriented sports biographies. So that got me very interested in what was going on, why was it going on, and I was reading these in the 70s, and we're talking only 10 years or so removed. Of course, as a 8 or 9 or 10-year-old, that seemed like a century, but I was growing up just in the wake of the civil rights movement. Yeah, so I ended up going to seminary at Princeton in New Jersey, and my second semester of my first year, I took a class on the theology of James Cohan. Dr. James Cohan is one of the founders and pioneers of Black theology. And part of that class was every Friday we would watch a video series called Eyes on the Prize, which is an amazing documentary that was put together in the 1980s. And the very first week included in that first documentary the story of Emmett Till. And I remember that moment, hearing that story and looking at my hands and wishing they were a different color. It was the first time in my life that really the knowledge I had of racism and discrimination went from head knowledge to the heart and even the gut. I believe it was important for me to have my heart broken around race. And that put me on a path. I remember the Rodney King verdict happened. And Rodney King, who was pummeled over 50 times by Los Angeles police, unarmed, prone on the ground, batoned and kicked. The officers, again, were actually indicted, but again, there was a not guilty verdict. And South Central Los Angeles in late April, early May 1992 went up in flames. And there was something about that moment. There was the president of the seminary said, hey, let's have a conversation about our leadership as folks planning to minister and lead congregations in the 90s and beyond. Let's have a conversation about what we're learning, what this says to us in our vocation. And I decided to show up. And when I got there, there were about 40 Black students on campus. Almost all of them were in that chapel. There were about 150 Korean and Korean American students on campus. I'd say another 40 or 50 of those folks showed up, maybe a third. There were about 600 white students on campus, and if there were 12 of us, that's probably using pastor math to pad the numbers a little bit. There were very few white students in that room. And I don't remember a lot of what was said that evening, but I do feel like God said, if nothing else, you're called to show up. And really that set me on a path of concern and passion for racial justice, for organizing and working and building capacity and challenging others who are followers of Jesus to join this effort that has marked, we're about 30 years out from that right now. So that's been a big part of my journey over these last 3 decades.
Hi, I'm Chuck Mingo, pastor and leader of a nonprofit committed to racial healing, solidarity, and justice. And you're about to hear from my partner, my co-founder, Troy Jackson, who along with being a pastor for 22 years, also has a PhD in civil rights history. So when I tell you Troy is the history teacher you wish you had, you're about to find out why, as he gives us a deeper understanding on why we celebrate the holiday of Juneteenth.
As we come together to celebrate our newest national holiday, Juneteenth, one might ask, who freed the enslaved? Ask most in the United States, and a common answer would be President Abraham Lincoln, who on January 1, 1863, issued the Emancipation Proclamation, freeing the enslaved in any state that had joined the Confederacy. Others might point to the U.S. Congress and the ratification of the 13th Amendment on December 6, 1865, which officially ended slavery as part of the U.S. Constitution, except as punishment for a crime. Another compelling answer is the slaves, in fact, freed themselves. Consider the Underground Railroad, where the enslaved risked all to escape bondage by making the dangerous journey north. Or during the Civil War, as multitudes simply walked off plantations and claimed their own freedom. The celebration of our newest national holiday, Juneteenth, offers a different perspective, illustrating that ending an onerous and vile institution like slavery happens in fits and starts, and never smoothly. On June 19, 1865, federal troops arrived in Galveston, Texas, declaring that the roughly 250,000 enslaved in the state are in fact free, an event that took over 2 months after the actual end of the Civil War. What is so compelling about Juneteenth, however, is that we remember it. We remember this day because the freed enslaved in Texas claimed this day. The very next year, on June 19, 1866, those who had been freed from bondage in Texas had their first Jubilee celebration, and they kept celebrating year after year. The U.S. may call July 4th Independence Day, and increasingly over the years, the Black community around the nation has embraced Juneteenth as a day of jubilee and freedom that included them right from the beginning and was about their humanity. I love this use of the word jubilee, which comes from the Mosaic Law. This was a time after every 49 years where there would be a leveling, where there would be a reinstitution of equity and equality and opportunity for every person. The world would be set to rights. By using the word jubilee, those who first celebrated Juneteenth were not only celebrating their freedom, they were also offering a compelling call for justice and equity and opportunity. In a nation where holidays and